Week 10 is in the book, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. And first and foremost, I want to highlight a couple of players that are already very highly rostered, but not exactly 100% that I think need to be, and that includes Trey Lance, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, Mac Jones, quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Audric Estime, running back for the Denver Broncos, Juwan Jennings, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, Juwan Johnson, tight end for the New Orleans Saints, and Theo Johnson, tight end for the New York Giants. Again, all of these guys are rostered in well over 90% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%, so double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right, the preemptive quarterback add this week is Jets backup quarterback Tyrod Taylor for possibly one of two reasons. Number one, Aaron Rodgers just has not been very good this year, or at least he's been very inconsistent, and it's possible that the team benches him at some point in what is very quickly and very obviously become a lost season. The likelihood of benching him, I think, is very, very slim, but a way more possible option is number two, that Rodgers actually gets hurt and actually misses time, which we've seen Rodgers getting beat up multiple times already this season, including going into the medical tent this week to get checked for a concussion. But he's also dealt with ankle injuries in October, knee and hamstring injuries for the past couple of weeks, including being on the injury report heading into this week with a knee injury, and then, like I said, was checked for a concussion during the game. We know Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old. He's coming off of an Achilles injury, and the Jets' offensive line is not the best protection that a quarterback could have in the league. So it's possible that Aaron Rodgers gets hurt for real at some point over the next few weeks. And if he does, Tyrod is their backup, and we all know that he's a very reliable fantasy option for a spot start, even at his current age too, including 3 games with over 275 passing yards and 1 to 2 touchdowns last year as the starter for the New York Giants. And he also had 25 plus rushing yards in those same 3 games too. If he's available in your Superflex league, stash him now before Rodgers actually gets hurt and misses time. Before we move on to running backs, there was one wide receiver standout on the week off of the waiver wire, which was the newly acquired Marquez Valdes-Scantling for the New Orleans Saints, filling in as the wide receiver 1 basically, with Chris Olave now on IR, Rashid Shaheed out for the year, and Bub Means also on the injured reserve too. 3 receptions, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The only 2 touchdowns actually for New Orleans in their upset win over the Atlanta Falcons. Now, there is a double-edged sword that comes with MVS's stat line this week. The long ball usage was nice to see, and his second touchdown was on the goal line, so he wasn't entirely just the deep guy. He was also tied for second on the team in targets, behind Alvin Kamara, of course, tied with Juwan Johnson, but that was only on 3 actual targets. So it was fun to see the usage, but it just really wasn't enough usage to really put your trust into moving forward. However, if MVS gets more integrated into this offense and actually gets the Rashid Shaheed role that was so productive earlier in the year, it is possible that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a home run flex play if you really need a guy, especially with more bye weeks still to come and injuries continuing to stack up. All right, now at the running back position, the first player that I could have thrown into the double check section because he is rostered in over 90% of leagues, but I wanted to highlight specifically is Gus Edwards. This week was Gus's first week back from an IR stint that also included a bye week in there, and in his first game back, he led the Chargers in rushing yards with 55 yards on 10 carries, and his day could have been better if he got more opportunities on the goal line instead of Justin Herbert running one in from the 4 and Hassan Haskins getting a 1-yard touchdown for some reason. But Edwards has been and will continue to be involved in this backfield. In 5 games played now this season, Edwards has rushed for double-digit carries 3 times, and he's broken 50 yards twice, and that's while playing under 50% of snaps, sharing the backfield with J.K. Dobbins. He is essentially David Montgomery light in that he has a solid workload every week, but he's not the RB1, so his production is kind of up and down, and the Chargers offense, as we know, is just not as good as the Detroit Lions, so he's not as comfortable of a weekly start as David Montgomery. But if J.K. Dobbins were to get hurt and miss any time whatsoever over the remainder of the year, Edwards could be a top 20 fantasy running back with the backfield all to himself, and that is why I wanted to highlight him. If he is still available in your leagues, I'd be willing to drop a massive chunk or even all of your fab left on Gus Edwards to stash him for the playoffs in case J.K. Dobbins were to get hurt. Then another handcuff running back to specifically highlight this week is once again D'Ernest Johnson of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who is now potentially just one step away from being the workhorse back in this offense after Tank Bigsby left the game with an ankle injury. Now, I don't currently know what the extent of the injury for Tank Bigsby is. Maybe you guys will know by the time you're watching this on Monday or even on Tuesday before your waivers actually run, but if it is serious and he misses time, Johnson is just an ETN injury away from a major role, even if the offense isn't as good without Trevor Lawrence with Mac Jones now. He has the rushing ability. He was already used as a receiver with Tank Bigsby when he was healthy without Travis Etienne this year, so we know he has that upside too. So if he were to get the starting role, even for just 1 week, that one spot start could be the difference between you winning and losing your matchup, which could also be the difference between making the playoffs or not, or getting that first round bye or not. So pick up D'Ernest Johnson if he is still available. And while we're at it, now is once again a great time to remind everybody to stash any and all handcuff running backs as we begin preparing for the fantasy playoffs. It doesn't even need to be your handcuffs specifically, though. If they are available to add, those probably get priority, but any handcuffs should be rostered and stashed in case of more injuries down the road. And this goes for rebuilding teams too. Even if you're out of contention, if you stash a handcuff and that handcuffs become the starter, you now get the opportunity to trade that player at a higher value, giving you a free ROI essentially of a third round pick, multiple thirds, or maybe even a second if the handcuff is that good, especially if you don't have a trade deadline in your Dynasty League, and you can take even more advantage of playoff teams that are getting a little bit desperate once they lose an actual starting running back. So when I see players on a ton of waiver wires out there right now, guys like Ty Chandler, Sean Tucker, Jamal Williams, Trey Sermon, and Tyler Goodson for the Indianapolis Colts, Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks for the Green Bay Packers, Jeremy McNichols, Daria Agumbawale, on top of Gus Edwards and D'Ernest Johnson that I already specifically highlighted, these guys should be added by everybody because the opportunity to sell them or actually use them for points could come at any moment.